Mic on. There we are. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here on Sunday morning. If we can make sure that we're all sitting quasi-close, there is I don't know if I know that I've talked about this before, but there is a rule that once, it's a rule of how do I say it? It's a mathematical term. It's when you have when you have a grid of like 6 by 6. Anyway, whatever. The term's not important. When you have a grid of 6 by 6 and people deviate, go out from there, you start to lose connection. Okay, and so that means that it becomes the further you sit from someone in a presentation, it is much easier to lose track of what's being said. And so in classrooms, they try not to organize desks that go further than 6 rows apart and further than 6 rows back. So I know that everyone really hates this, but I would really love if we could all move forward so that we could all be connected. I love all of you. I'm so excited to see you. But you know what's weird? I just recently went to the eye doctor, I think for the first time in my life. It's kind of weird. I was doing a video production for an eye doctor, and I let that slip that I had never been, I'd almost pretty much never been to the eye doctor since I was like maybe 5 years old. And then they told me, I walked in there thinking I had perfect eyesight. I'm a photographer, I'm a videographer. I look at little screens all day. I can tell when everything's in focus. And then I walked out of that eye doctor appointment with vision problems. So I fully blame the eye doctor for my vision problems. I walked in there with perfect vision and walked out with some corrections that I'm not going to make. So anyway, that is what's that? That's exactly like coming to church and then leaving offended is that's exactly what that is. You're walking into church and then you're leaving offended because someone told you there's a problem. But anyway. Good morning, everyone. I hope that everybody has had literally the best week ever. Welcome to our first service class, and my title today is For the Real Ones. Okay, for the real ones. This lesson goes out to all the real ones. And what I mean by that is now this is kind of a colloquial phrase that people use to say, all my people who are the real ones out there, the people that identify with me, people who are really involved in the project, whatever. And so that's kind of the gist of that. But I'm kind of taking that and making it a play on words because we're talking about this. This goes out to people who live in the real world, who come to church and then leave church and go out into a real world that encounter real people that have real emotions. Because, sometimes people come to church and they have a whole different persona that they put on when they walk in. And it's almost like they're not even a real person. They're just like, everything is perfect about them. They don't have to work on anything in their life. This goes out to the real ones. If that's you, you can be if you are perfect today, you can be dismissed right now to the cafe and we'll open it up for you right now. So, go ahead, Brother Davis. It's all you, man. But if you're not one of the real ones, if you're not one of the perfect people, and you're one of the real ones, then you can stand here with me today. So, and this is the kind of the kickoff for. Is there any chance that I could get these monitors turned off? Okay, all right. I just felt like I feel like I'm standing in an echo. Maybe it's because I'm standing in front of speakers, so I'm just creating problems by trying to get close to you guys. All right, so I'm starting a new series on 1 Peter, right? And so we just finished the Nehemiah series. It was a long series. Took about a year or so to get through. And so I've decided on a book that's maybe a little less ambitious because it's got like 4 chapters. It's really playing it fast and loose with the word book here. We call it a book of the Bible, and it was like literally just like a letter that you can read in your personal time in about 15 minutes. So it's depending on your reading speed, but whatever. We are in 1 Peter, okay? That is a general epistle. And so what marks a general epistle from all the other letters that were written is when you take Paul was like very much a surgeon with his books. Like he was, like we see his book to the Corinthians, we see his book to the Romans, we see his book to, we see all these books that were written to like a church. It's like, hey, you guys were a problem, here's how we're going to fix it. Okay, and Peter was writing to a region. The regions are collectively known today as Turkey. And so he was writing to that region, and so there's a difference in tone when you're dealing with like a specific church, because they're like, Paul's like, hey, you guys have been doing this and that's a problem. Peter's like, hey, this is something that all of you need to know. And so what I found what was really interesting when we were going through Nehemiah is I was covering like a lot of very different subjects, and I thought that was just like the coolest thing. We were covering subjects because Nehemiah is a pretty narrow focus. It's like, this is about building the church. This is about moving the kingdom forward. But when you start dealing with that subject, you realize like how many things are in support of that. And so I covered a lot of topics that I did not expect to cover in Nehemiah. And so with this lesson, or with this series, I hope to cover a lot of things that hit a lot of people, right? Because Peter was writing to Christians in order to advance them, I guess. And he was writing, and so what I hope, and so basically this is a book that is all discipleship. And so I think that is a very applicable letter, book, however you want to call it. It's a very applicable letter that we can talk about, we can dive in. It's going to hit pretty much everyone, most lessons. So I think that's pretty exciting. And I'm really interested to see how that goes. One thing I loved about the Nehemiah series was how much we began to know about Nehemiah. I feel like I really got to know Nehemiah through that study. But there's a difference here in that we're not going to. This is Peter, the apostle, the one who did all the stuff. We're dealing with him writing to people. We're not watching him interact with people. You know how actions speak louder than words, right? So we were able to look at Nehemiah's actions, and we were able to ascertain his character through that. So if we want to get to know Peter in the way that we knew Nehemiah, we have to go back, okay? And so we have to go back to when Peter was around doing stuff, and we have to look at the actions of Peter. And here's what we know at the top level. Peter, at times, could be very brash. Peter was a very passionate person. And then Peter also had good intentions. Peter was very passionate. He had good intentions. He was probably, I feel like he was the most passionate disciple. He was one of the 12 disciples of Jesus, and in addition to that, he was kind of in the inner circle, and he's the person who preaches the first sermon on the first day of the church. So that's pretty cool. And that first day of the church was pretty successful. They went from like 122 members to 3,000. So that's pretty awesome. And then Peter did some like really unbelievable stuff. Like Peter would walk through cities and God would heal people as his shadow passed over them. So like that doesn't happen when I do that. So Peter, the exploits of Peter are maybe like some of the most exciting of any disciple. And so, but Peter had a lot of flaws. He was he was brash. He had good intentions. Peter makes mistakes. And Peter's the kind of guy who makes mistakes in front of everyone, right? When you're the guy who has no plan in life and you just rush into things and you just like make mistakes, like you do it in front of everybody because you didn't wait for the group. You just went ahead and just did it, right? That's the kind of guy Peter is. And so he makes his mistakes in front of everyone. And Peter was of low birth. He was a fisherman. So he was not, now James and John were fishermen, but that was kind of a different situation because James and John owned the boats, right? They were business owners. They were well off. Their dad had a lot of property. He had a lot of influence, and so Peter was an action-oriented person. He does not strike me as the kind of person who operated with a lot of a plan. So I identify with that because I am not a planned person. I am just like, let's get in there and figure it out, and then we'll just adjust as we do things. So I'm the antithesis of people like Brother Pavey, and so I'm sure that I just drive him nuts sometimes with my lack of a plan because I like to just walk in things and figure it out. I just don't have the attention span, I think, to sit and like make detailed plans. It just, just sitting still, that's a bit much for me, right? So I want to hone in on a few things that Peter learned, okay? In Luke 5:2, we find Peter learning obedience. And he saw 2 boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land, and so Jesus sat down and taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said, "Simon, put into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And this is kind of a funny scenario to me because have you ever had respect for a person, but you work in a field that they know nothing about, and then you've gotten a lot of advice from that person? Right? So it's as though pastor this is like pastor walking onto my job and being like, "Hey, you shouldn't shoot this way." And I'm just like, all right. And I'm trying to be respectful here. I know what I'm doing. My ego is flaring up like crazy. And I'm just staring at this guy being like, okay, let me just do this. Yeah, because let me take the nets from this side of the boat. Because clearly all the fish are over here. And that's what's been wrong all night. Sure, Jesus, you're the expert with all of your carpentry skills and your knowledge of the Bible. Great, that'll really solve this. He says, "Master, we have toiled all night and took nothing." And there's an exclamation point in the KJV. So he's like saying, we've done this all night. We have toiled all night and we've gotten nothing. And then he's like, kind of checking himself. He's like, okay, be respectful, be respectful. See, Peter is one of the real ones, right? He says, "But at your word, I will let down the nets." And when they had done this, he looked stupid. They had closed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come help them. I think I'm in the ESV. No, we're right. No, I'm in the KJV. Anyway, they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats, so they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man." He's like, "Look, I had a big attitude in front of you. I knew who you were. I was listening to you teach. But here's the thing. I'm just me. I'm just a fisherman. I've got all kinds of problems and all kinds of issues here." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men." And when they brought their boats to the land, here's what's really cool. They left everything. They left everything and followed him. So Peter learns obedience. Peter learns sometimes it's not going to make sense to you. Sometimes all of your skill and all of your knowledge is not going to make sense, and it's not going to help you. And then he learns what it's like to leave everything behind. To leave behind the idea that you had for your future. To leave behind everything that you thought you were building in this business that you had. He leaves everything behind. And then he learns faith in Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. This is talking about Jesus. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. Right? So Jesus walking on water. Most of you are familiar with this story. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come out onto the water." And this is a really interesting point. Peter sees Jesus, and nobody else seems to have the inclination to go out there, right? And that's interesting to me, because if I saw Jesus walking on the water, I would think, "That's really cool, Jesus. I'm not doing that." It wouldn't even cross my mind to get out of the boat. But Peter he's one of the real ones, right? He's not one for plans. He's just like, let's do something awesome. And he said, "Come." And so Peter gets out of the boat, walks in the water, comes to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And so Peter, a really normal man, sees divinity, sees Jesus, and knows that if Jesus is who he thinks he is, if he wills it, he can move beyond what is actually possible. Peter's thinking, if that guy is who he says he is, then what I can do is really only determined by what he wills. And so when Jesus calls you to something, it's not really about whether you have the ability to do it or not. And when God calls you to save people and to reach people, it's not really about whether or not you feel like you have the social skills to do that. It's not really about anything else other than, here's the thing, bottom line, if he wills it, you can walk on water. Subtext, it's got to be his will and not yours. And that's the way that God works. You encounter God in life, and the boat that you used to be bound to, or the life that you used to be trapped within, doesn't seem to hold you anymore. God calls you out of the things that held you captive and held you contained. Everyone was on that boat, and that was the limit of their life. They could swim for what? A minute? A few minutes? Swimming is exhausting. When you're out at sea, you're kind of held captive by a boat, and that's the way that we kind of live our life. We have a very limited skill set. If you focus really, really hard in your life on a few things, you can become a master at some things, but you are never going to just be able to exist in an ocean. You're going to be contained by a boat. You're going to be contained by your limitations. You're going to be contained by those things. And Peter sees a chance to move beyond them, and that's exactly what happens. And so Peter learns faith, and Peter learned all about the reality of Tuesday Christianity here, right? So it's really easy to be a Christian on Sunday at about 12:30, because that's generally when the altar call is wrapping up. It's really easy to just be like the most holy person that you've ever met. It's really easy to be a Christian when the emotions are high, and we hear the singing in worship service. We feel the conviction. It's really easy to be a Christian from like 12:30 to like 1 o'clock. We'll give it 1 o'clock. That span of time. But then Monday rolls around, and then Tuesday rolls around, and all those commitments and all that fire and all that zeal is pretty much gone. And you have to deal with this person that you are still, because he didn't go away. So Peter gets out of the boat and he sees the wind, he sees the waves, and that's exactly what Tuesday Christianity is. And here's what's really, really encouraging to me about Peter. Life being distracting and beginning to sink doesn't mean it's over. If there's anything that Peter teaches us, it's that you can have flaws and still walk on the water. You can have flaws and still be used of God. You can get it wrong. Because thank God for Peter, because man, that's exactly where I live. I don't know about you, but this is for the real ones. And if you're one of the real ones and you make mistakes and you have emotions and you live a real life, this is for you. It's not over when you make a mistake. It's not over when something goes wrong. It's not over when you come up short. It's not over when you're the one to blame. It's not over. Like when Nathan encountered David and said, "Thou art the man." David, this is not you are the problem. That's really discouraging to find out that you're the problem. Thank God that's not the end. So, thank God for Peter. And that's the kind of guy that writes this book. You can be a real person full of emotions that make it hard to see the right thing to do and fail, but you can still get up again. And so he learns how to be corrected when he told Jesus that, Jesus was like, look, here's some things that are about to happen. I'm going to die. And I'll rise again 3 days later. And Peter's like, I'm not allowing that to happen. And Jesus was like, look, I rebuke you, Satan. Now, I don't know about you, but I've followed a guy for let's say I'm Peter, and I've followed a guy for a couple years, and I'm like, this guy's the Messiah, and I love this guy, and I'm over here like, whatever you want, I'm gonna do it. Like, I'm fired up. I'm super passionate about this guy's mission. And then he calls me Satan. I don't know how demoralizing that would be for you, but that's not my best day. If I'm looking back on life, that's not my best work, right? And so he literally rebukes Peter and calls him Satan. He says, because look, you're looking at man's plans, not mine. And my plans are greater than yours. It's a thing that Peter has to learn over and over and over. He's like, God's greater than me. God's more than me. If there's anyone who ran up into their limitations over and over, it's Peter. And so, then at Passover, then Peter learned. This is one of the wild ones. He then learns the difference between intentions and reality, because a lot of us have this issue. This is for the real ones. And the difference between intentions, emotions, and reality. Here's the thing, and I'm going to make a strong statement that some people don't like. I don't care how emotional you are in the altar. I don't care how exuberant your worship is. Those are great things. I'm not discounting those things, but I am going to tell you, they are not going to change you. They give you motivation, but right, it's the difference between motivation and discipline, right? Motivation is like, I feel like living for God today. I'm motivated today. But discipline says, I don't care if I feel like it or not. I'm going to get up and I'm going to pray. I don't care if I feel like this or not. Motivation is so fleeting. Motivation is something you cannot rely on. It's great when you have it. It's great when you feel like it. But you are a person. You are a real person whose emotions are going to fluctuate. And if you are reliant on your emotions to get everything in your life done, it's not going to go well. So, it's not about motivation. It's about discipline. And so here, Peter has all of this. Peter hears that, like, Jesus looks at his disciples and says, you guys that have been following me for these 2 years, you're going to deny me. You're going to run away. And Peter's like, not me, because I'm better. I'm built different. And he's like, look, I'm never going to deny you. Nah. And then Jesus looks at him specifically. He's like, I can imagine some kind of annoyance because Jesus, like, he's got that whole God thing working for him. He's like, I know what's going to happen, Peter. You're going to not deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. And Peter's like, and then Luke 22:54 rolls around and says, they seized him, Jesus, and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house. And Peter was following at a distance. He's like, I'm not going to. And he was still holding to his guns. He's like, I'm not going to deny. I'm going to follow him to the end. I'm not going to deny him. I'm here. I don't care if they're going to arrest me or not. Full of passion. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. And then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking at him closely, said, hey, you were with him. We saw you. And he's like, no, this is not me. He's like, and then a little later, someone else saw him and said, hey, you're one of them. And Peter said, nah, I'm not. This is not me. You're thinking about somebody else. And then an interval of about an hour, still another session saying, certainly this man was also with him, for he too is a Galilean. And Peter said, man, I do not know what you're talking about. You clearly don't know what you're talking about. That guy, I don't know the first thing about him. And then the rooster crows and the blood runs cold out of Peter's face. He's like, oh, what have I done? Intentions are different from reality. Intentions and passion and emotions and worship is different from how things are going to be when reality hits. So this is for the real ones. If you're the kind of person who has made mistakes when you didn't want to, when you were the kind of person who made commitments on Sunday and mistakes on Tuesday, this guy, the captain of that, the guy who did that and then had it recorded in the Bible. Like, we get the luxury of just having a lot of that to be personal with just us and Jesus. But like, Peter's business is displayed for everybody forever. And so people, like, I imagine someone's gonna, like, people have ammunition against him in heaven. Like, when we all get to heaven, like, and someone's like, oh man, it'd be really cool if we didn't deny Christ. Everyone has ammunition against him because his mistakes are in front of literally everyone. And so what does this tell us about Peter? He learned humility. It tells us that as normal as you and I, he was as normal as you and I, more acquainted with failure than any of the other apostles. And yet, that's the guy who preaches the first sermon on the first day of church. That's the guy who walks through a city and God begins to heal people from his shadow. He doesn't even stop and pray with them. He's just like, that's good enough. That's wild. Everyone that his shadow crossed. He learned humility. And so, Peter's a real one, and he is writing to real people. So, specifically, who is he writing to? We find it in 1 Peter 1. To those who are elect exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. He calls them elect exiles, and he introduces himself as Peter. Can we throw 1 Peter 1 on the screen? I neglected to put that in my notes for some reason. So if you could just help me out and get us 1 Peter 1. We'll get there. I know I threw him a curveball here. But he introduces himself as an apostle, one of the ones who was with Jesus. You see, in spite of the mistakes, in spite of the issues, we read, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to the strangers scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. Despite all the mistakes, I'm writing to you. Despite all the issues, I'm writing to you. And I'm standing on the other side of mistakes. I'm standing on the other side of transformation. And Peter still made mistakes. Peter got into a fight with Paul And Peter was dead wrong in front of everyone. And Paul was like, I withstood Peter. And Paul writes it in his letter. And it's in the book forever. So once again, Peter's mistakes are there for everyone to know about. Even after Peter was on the other side of transformation, on the other side, being an apostle, being one of the ones who was with Christ, he still made mistakes. And that's the thing. You're never going to stop being a person. You're never going to stop being a real one. You're never going to stop being full of all of you. And we know how great that can be, right? So, he calls them elect exiles. And what does it mean to be an elect exile? It means you are one of God's people. It means, and it also means that where you are is not where you belong. And you're a stranger in a strange land. I like the way the King James says it there. He said, you're strangers in this place. You're strangers in Turkey. You're strangers where you're living. And maybe you're thinking, well, that doesn't really apply to me. I live in America where Christianity is the predominant religion. And maybe you're thinking that there's not really a difference between a Christian and the rest of the world. Well, that is a problem. There 100% should be a difference between you and the rest of the world. There is 100%. If you read this Bible, if you read that Bible and you conform your life to it, then there will be a difference between you and the rest of the world. And if there is no difference, then there is a problem. If you read this Bible and think, I don't have to change anything. If you read this Bible and say, I'm good enough. I know that this world and this culture likes to tell people, oh, you're perfect the way you are. No, you're not. And here's the problem with that message. It leaves you with no hope. Because if you are sitting in depression and sitting in issues in your life and the world is saying, hey, you're good enough. No, that means that you have no ability to change your situation. It means there's nowhere to go from there. This world loves to tell people they're good enough. You don't have to change anything. God loves you, so you don't have to change anything. No, God loves you, and He wants you to be way better than who you are right now. And the transformation that God offers is the greatest transformation that you will ever encounter in life. And it's not an easy road. It's full of you having to encounter the person that you are. It's full of you having to encounter all of your misgivings, all of your imperfections, all of your inclinations. And if you don't feel like a stranger in America, then something is wrong, because this book requires us to live different. And it's not that if we went to some country in the world where everyone was Christian that we would belong. The thing is, heaven is our home. We're going to be a stranger no matter where we go in this world. This world is not our home. We have a greater home to get to, a place where there's no more crying, no more weeping. And we get to be with our Savior. And we're going to leave behind all these misgivings, all these imperfections, all these issues that we've carried with us, all this ego. 1 Peter 2:9, but you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for His own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. Who you are right now is a shadow of who you could be. Transformation is the greatest thing this church has to offer you. Don't be satisfied with who you are now. Don't take all of your imperfections and say, I'm good enough. No, submit yourself to the Bible and allow God to transform you. Allow God to transform your relationships. Allow God to transform how you interact with the world. Allow God to transform all these things about you, and your life is going to be exponentially better. But it's not easy. And Peter ends his introduction with this, 1 Peter 1:2, according to the foreknowledge of God the Father and the sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience to Jesus Christ and for the sprinkling with His blood, May grace and peace be multiplied unto you. Grace and peace. So these people that he's writing to were strangers in another land. They were in another land where, see, we do have this luxury in America. About 20% of America, according to a statistic I looked at last night, about 20% of America attend church every week. And then 40% of America attends church on some sort of monthly basis. Now, this is any kind of church, right? And so take with that what you will. But we have that luxury, I guess. We're not so weird for going to church. What is weird is the change of behavior. And so these people were going into a land where it's not just a change of behavior, but it's a change of where they go, who they associate with, the gods they serve. It's a radical difference. You know, I can't get into this. We have 4 minutes. It's a radical difference. And Peter says, here's the thing that I know that every one of you need. When you're going out, you're going to need grace. You're going to need to have grace with people who don't believe like you. You're going to have grace with people who are making mistakes that you see. And you want to change, and they're not ready for it. And God is going to need to give you grace. May grace and peace. You're going to have people that come at you because these people were facing real persecution. Throwing rocks at them. Killing them. People, it's like, to look at you, to put it in a social aspect, it's kind of like the roles have been reversed, where back then the world was largely pagan. And the things that they did was very normal. Sacrificing a child in fire was normal. The god Molech, they served that god. They would literally they had this god with brass hands, and they would set a child in these molten hands until it died. That was normal. They served Baal. They served Ishtar. And all these gods would allow them to allow them to just basically act on their most carnal desires and call it a good thing. Call it like, hey, you're doing really good with your life right now after you did that. And basically these gods were excuses to live in whatever way they wanted to live. And then we have people who are denying all that. You know what? It's like being a Christian is like light suddenly being on you. And everyone around you having a little bit of that light shining on them, and they see all the imperfections that suddenly you've been dealing with and you've gotten out of your life, and those imperfections are very much present in them. And they say, what, do you think you're better than me now? That's exactly what happens the moment someone walks out of the world and into the church. The people that are the closest around them immediately begin to be a little offended. What, do you think you're better than me now? You going to church? You think you're better than this family? You think you're better than this? You think you're better than the way we've been living? That's exactly what happens. That was happening on a much bigger scale because it wasn't just family. It was their neighbors. It was anyone who saw them. They were truly strangers. And they said, you are going to need grace. And let me tell you something, you're going to need grace with your family. And you're going to need peace with your family. You're going to need peace with the people around you. You're going to need to approach the world in meekness. Okay, we talked about this in the Nehemiah series. What is meekness? Meekness is not weakness. It's not just walking through the world being like, oh, I'm just a humble Christian. No, it's walking into the world. Meekness is like the difference between someone with, it's like me walking around with a sledgehammer. And I could take this Bible and I could smash you in the face with it. And I could take it and be like, this is all the things that are wrong with your life. Get it together. That's not meekness. Meekness is walking around with this sledgehammer and choosing not to smash people in the face with it. knowing and having tact and knowing where someone is in their life. It's having grace with people. It's seeking peace with people. That's how we deal with the world around us. That's how we deal as strangers in a strange land. You're going to need peace. Let's pray. God, I pray that we have grace when we walk into our workplace. I pray that we have peace in our families. I pray that our decision to follow you, though it's sometimes difficult, though it's sometimes hard and we're full of failings, I pray that you would give us grace and peace and let it be multiplied unto us. In Jesus' name we pray. I hope that every single one of you walks out of here into your workplace, walks out of here and you have grace with the people that work with you, the people you work for, the people around you that are not living the way that you're living. I hope you have grace and peace, and I hope that it follows you. I hope that you leave a footprint of grace and peace everywhere you go. All right, you're dismissed. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Absolutely fantastic.
Oh, thanks.